If you had met me a year ago, you'd probably say I was just another face in the crowd. Someone who worked hard, paid her bills on time, and tried to keep her family happy, even when it felt like I was the only one trying. My name is Rachel, and for most of my life, I believed that if I did everything right, life would eventually reward me. But nothing could have prepared me for the day my entire world changed with a single, heart-stopping email. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day that blurs into all the others. I was sitting at my tiny kitchen table sorting through a stack of bills when I remembered the lottery ticket I'd bought on a whim. I almost didn't bother checking it. After all, people like me don't win the lottery. But as I typed in the numbers, my hands started to shake. One by one, every single number matched. I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. I had just won $20 million. For a moment, I felt like I was floating. Then, just as quickly, reality crashed in. My mind raced with questions. Who do I tell? What do I do now? I thought about my family, my mother, my sister, my father, and a cold, uneasy feeling crept in. I knew them, their hopes and disappointments, their judgments and secrets. I realized in that instant that telling them would change everything. So I made a decision that would shape the months to come. I wouldn't tell a soul. Not yet. Not until I knew who I could really trust. And that's when the real story began. Growing up, my family looked perfect from the outside. We lived in a modest house on a quiet street, the kind where neighbors waved and kids rode their bikes until the streetlights flickered on. My mother, Linda, was the heart of our home, always bustling, always busy, always ready with a casserole or a sharp word depending on her mood. She loved us. I know she did. But her love came with conditions. If I brought home a good report card, she'd beam with pride and tell her friends. If I stumbled, she'd sigh and remind me how much she'd sacrificed. Her approval was a currency I spent my whole childhood chasing. Then there was my sister, Emily, 2 years younger but always 2 steps ahead. Emily was the golden child, brilliant, beautiful, and fiercely competitive. She could turn anything into a contest, from grades to who got the last slice of pie. I remember one Christmas when we were teenagers. I saved up for months to buy Mom a necklace. Emily, sensing an opportunity, pooled her allowance with Dad and bought Mom a designer purse. The necklace was forgotten, and Emily's gift was all anyone talked about. I learned early that in my family, love was measured in grand gestures and quiet rivalries. My father, Mark, was a different story. He was present, but never really there. He worked long hours at the factory, coming home tired and silent. He did speak. It was usually to settle an argument or remind us to turn off the lights. I can count on one hand the number of times he hugged me. Still, there were moments, rare and precious, when he'd slip me a $5 bill for ice cream or quietly fix my bike without saying a word. Those small acts meant more to me than any of Emily's trophies or Mom's praise. Despite the undercurrents, there were good times too. Sunday dinners where we laughed until we cried, family vacations to the lake, late night talks with Emily when we were both too tired to compete. But as we grew older, the cracks widened. Mom's judgments became sharper, Emily's ambition more ruthless, and Dad's silences longer. When I lost my job a few years ago, I called my mother in tears, hoping for comfort. She told me to pull myself together and not to embarrass the family. Emily sent a text, "Tough break. You'll figure it out." Dad didn't say anything at all still. I clung to the hope that, deep down, we were a family, that when it really mattered, we'd show up for each other. I told myself that the disappointments were just bumps in the road, not signs of something broken. But as I sat there with a winning lottery ticket burning a hole in my pocket, I couldn't help but remember every time I'd reached out for help and found only empty hands. I wanted to believe that things could be different, that my family would surprise me. But a part of me, the part that had learned to expect less, wondered if I was about to prove myself right. And so, with $20 million hidden away and a lifetime of complicated love behind me, I started to wonder if I needed them now. Would they be there? Or would I finally see my family for who they really were? After the shock of winning, I found myself looking at my family through new eyes. Every conversation, every offhand comment about money or success suddenly felt loaded with meaning. I started to notice things I'd always brushed aside. The way my mother would brag about Emily's promotion at the bank, or how she'd sigh when I mentioned my freelance gigs, as if my work was just a hobby I'd eventually outgrow. Money, I realized, was the silent judge in our house, deciding who was worthy of praise and who was just scraping by. It started small. One Saturday afternoon, I joined Mom and Emily for coffee at our favorite cafe. Emily was in high spirits, talking about her latest bonus and the new condo she was eyeing downtown. Mom listened, eyes shining, nodding along as if every word was a personal victory. When the check came, Emily didn't hesitate. She paid for herself and slid the bill toward me. Mom didn't even glance at it. I smiled, paid for both of us, and tucked the moment away. It was just coffee, I told myself, but it felt like something more. A week later, I called my father, hoping for a different kind of conversation. He answered on the third ring, his voice gruff, but not unkind. I asked how he was, if he needed anything. He said he was fine, just tired, and quickly changed the subject to the weather. I tried to steer the conversation back, mentioning that work had been slow and things were a bit tight. He paused, then said, "You'll figure it out, kid. You always do." I could almost hear him reaching for the remote, ready to disappear into the background noise of the television. I started to test the waters more deliberately. At Sunday dinner, I let slip that my rent had gone up and I was struggling to keep up with bills. Emily barely looked up from her phone. Mom pursed her lips and said, "Maybe it's time you found something more stable, Rachel. You can't expect life to just hand you things." The irony almost made me laugh. Dad just kept eating, eyes fixed on his plate. But it wasn't just the big moments, it was the little things too. Emily called one night, asking if I could watch her dog while she went on a weekend trip with her boyfriend. She didn't offer to pay, didn't even ask if I was free, just assumed I'd say yes. When I hesitated, she sighed and said, "Come on, Rach, you're not that busy." I agreed because that's what I always did. But as I hung up, I wondered if she'd do the same for me. I watched as my family navigated their own small crises. Mom complained about a neighbor who borrowed her lawnmower and returned it with a scratch. "People just don't respect what isn't theirs," she said, shaking her head. Emily ranted about a coworker who asked for a loan and then bought a new purse the next week. "Some people just want a handout," she scoffed. I listened, nodding, feeling the weight of their words settle on my shoulders. The more I observed, the more I realized how transactional our love had become. Generosity was reserved for birthdays and holidays, carefully measured and never given without expectation. I started to wonder if I'd ever really seen my family clearly, or if I'd just been too desperate for their approval to notice the cracks. One evening after another tense dinner, I sat alone in my apartment, the lottery ticket hidden in a drawer. I thought about what it would mean to ask for help. Not as a test, but as a real plea. Would they come through for me? Or would I'd be met with the same indifference I'd seen so many times before? The question gnawed at me, keeping me awake long after midnight. I knew I couldn't keep pretending forever, so I made a plan. I would ask each of them for help in my own quiet way and see what happened. Maybe I was setting myself up for disappointment. Maybe I was about to be proven wrong. But I needed to know once and for all where I stood. And as I lay there in the dark, couldn't shake the feeling that the answers I found would change everything. I started with my mother, thinking that if anyone would come through for me, it would be her. I called on a rainy Thursday evening, my voice trembling just enough to sound real. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important," I began, trying to keep my tone casual. She was busy as always, but agreed to meet me for lunch the next day. I spent the night rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd explain my situation without giving too much away. I told myself she'd understand, that she'd remember all the times I'd been there for her, for Emily, for everyone. At the cafe, I laid it out as simply as I could. "I'm behind on rent, Mom. Work's been slow and I just need a little help to get through the next month." I watched her face carefully, searching for a flicker of concern. Instead, she frowned, stirring her coffee with unnecessary force. "Rachel, you know I'm on a fixed income. Things aren't easy for me either. Maybe if you'd made different choices, you wouldn't be in this position." Her words stung, but what hurt more was the way she looked past me, as if I were a stranger asking for a favor, not her daughter. She offered advice: get a roommate, cut back on expenses, but not a single offer of help. I left the cafe feeling smaller than I had in years. Next was Emily. I waited until she was in a good mood, catching her after a yoga class, her cheeks flushed and her energy high. I told her the same story, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she'd surprise me. She listened, arms crossed, her eyes darting to her phone every few seconds. Rach, I wish I could help, but things are tight right now. I just put a down payment on the condo, and you know how expensive that is? Maybe you could ask mom or dad. She hugged me quickly, already moving on to her next appointment. There, watching her walk away, feeling the gap between us widen with every step. My father was the hardest. I drove to his house rehearsing my words the whole way. He answered the door in his usual uniform, faded jeans and a flannel shirt, the TV murmuring in the background. I sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped, and told him I was struggling. He listened, nodding occasionally, but his eyes never quite met mine. When I finished, he sighed and said, I wish I could help, kid, but I've got my own problems. You're tough. You'll figure it out. He patted my shoulder, a gesture. That felt more like dismissal than comfort. Each conversation left me more hollow than the last. I replayed their words in my head, searching for some sign that I'd missed, some hint of love or concern buried beneath the excuses. But all I found was a cold, aching emptiness. I thought about all the times I'd dropped everything to help. Them driving mom to doctor's appointments, loaning Emily money for textbooks, fixing dad's car when he couldn't afford a mechanic. I'd always believed that family meant showing up no matter what. But now, faced with their indifference, I wondered if I'd been fooling myself all along. The final blow came when I overheard Emily talking to mom on the phone. She's always been a bit dramatic, hasn't she? Maybe this will finally teach her to grow up. Their laughter drifted through the thin apartment walls, sharp and unforgiving. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to steady my breathing, feeling the last threads of hope unravel. In that moment, the truth hit me with a force I couldn't ignore. My family wasn't going to save me. Not now, not ever. The support I'd always dreamed of was just that, a dream. And as the weight of their rejection settled over me, I realized I had a choice to make. I could keep chasing their approval, or I could finally start living for myself. The pain was raw, but beneath it, a new resolve began to take shape. Something had to change, and this time it would be me. In the days that followed, I moved through my life in a haze, the sting of my family's rejection lingering like a bruise I couldn't hide. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe someone had changed their mind. Maybe they'd realized how much I needed them. But the messages were always the same. Emily sending a meme, mom forwarding a chain email, dad asking if I'd seen the game last night. Not a single word about my situation, not even a casual, how are you holding up? It was as if my plea for help had vanished into thin air, erased by their own discomfort. Anger simmered beneath my sadness, a slow burn that colored everything I did. I found myself replaying old memories, moments I'd once cherished, now tainted by doubt. Had I always been the outsider, the one expected to give but never to receive? I remembered the time I drove through a snowstorm to bring Emily soup when she was sick. The hours I spent helping mom clean out the garage, the weekends I gave up to mow dad's lawn. I'd done it all without question, believing that love meant sacrifice. Now, I wondered if they'd ever seen me as anything more than a convenience. The worst part was the gossip. I heard it in whispers, in the way conversations stopped when I entered the room, in the sideways glances exchanged over dinner. One afternoon, I caught mom on the phone with Aunt Carol, her voice low and conspiratorial. Rachel's always been a bit unstable. She never could manage her money. I just hope she learns her lesson this time. The words cut deeper than I expected, each syllable a reminder of how little she understood me. Emily, too, seemed to relish the drama, telling friends that I was going through a phase and would bounce back like she always does. Their judgment was a wall I couldn't climb. No matter how hard I tried, I started to withdraw, avoiding family gatherings and letting calls go to voicemail. The silence was both a relief and a torment, giving me space to think but also amplifying my loneliness. I spent long nights staring at the ceiling, the lottery ticket hidden in my drawer, like a secret weapon I was too afraid to use. I imagined what would happen if I told them the truth, if I revealed that I was, in fact, a millionaire, that their help was never really needed. Would they apologize? Would they beg for forgiveness? Or would they simply find a new way to judge me? The temptation to reveal everything grew stronger with each passing day. I pictured the look on Emily's face, the shock in Mom's eyes, the awkward silence from Dad. Part of me wanted to hurt them, to make them feel the same sense of betrayal I carried, but another part hesitated, unsure if revenge would bring the closure I craved. I wondered if I was being unfair, if my test had been too harsh, if I was expecting too much from people who had always shown me who they were. Meanwhile, my family carried on as if nothing had changed. Emily posted photos from her new condo. Mom organized a church bake sale. Dad tinkered with his car in the driveway. Their lives moved forward, untouched by my pain, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. The contrast was almost unbearable. My world had shifted, but theirs remained perfectly intact. I realized then that the secret I was keeping wasn't just about the money. It was about the truth of who we were as a family, the roles we played, the love we gave and withheld. I stood at a crossroads, torn between exposing their flaws and protecting my own heart. The decision weighed on me, heavy and relentless, as I tried to figure out what kind of daughter, sister, and person I wanted to be. And as the days blurred together, one question echoed in my mind. If I revealed everything, would it set me free? Or would it only deepen the divide? It was a Tuesday evening when everything finally snapped. I'd stopped by my mother's house to drop off a casserole dish I'd borrowed, hoping for a brief civil exchange. Instead, I walked in on Mom and Emily, sitting at the kitchen table, their voices low but unmistakable. "She's always been a burden," Mom was saying, her words slicing through me before she even realized I was there. Emily didn't argue, she just nodded, her lips pressed into a thin, satisfied line. I stood frozen in the doorway, casserole dish trembling in my hands as they both looked up in surprise. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Mom recovered first, forcing a brittle smile. "Oh, Rachel, we didn't hear you come in." Emily glanced away, suddenly fascinated by her phone. I set the dish on the counter, my hands shaking, and left without a word. The drive home was a blur of headlights and tears, my mind replaying their conversation on a cruel, endless loop. I'd always suspected how they saw me, but hearing it out loud was a wound I couldn't ignore. That night, something inside me shifted. I was done waiting for them to change, done hoping for the kind of love and support they'd never given. I realized I didn't need their approval or their pity. What I needed was closure, a way to reclaim my story and finally let go of the hope that had kept me tethered to their expectations. So I made a decision. I would confront them, not with anger or accusations, but with the truth. I sent a group text inviting them to dinner at my apartment that Friday. "I have something important to share," I wrote, keeping my words deliberately vague. Emily replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Mom asked if I needed her to bring anything. Dad didn't respond, but I knew he'd show up, if only out of curiosity. In the days leading up to the dinner, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of what they might say or do. I was in control of my story, and I was ready to face whatever came next. I cleaned my apartment, planned a simple meal, and rehearsed what I would say. I wanted them to see me not as a burden or a failure, but as someone who had found her own strength, even in the face of their indifference. As Friday approached, I could sense their curiosity growing. Emily called twice, fishing for details. Mom left a voicemail, her tone a mix of concern and suspicion. Even Dad texted, asking if everything was okay. I kept my answers short, letting the suspense build. For once, I was the one holding the cards, and I intended to play them on my own terms. The night of the dinner, as I set the table and lit the candles, I felt a quiet resolve settle in my chest. Whatever happened next, I knew I was ready. Well, I was. Done hiding, done pretending, done waiting for my family to become something they were not. The truth was coming, and with it, the freedom I'd been searching for all along. The night of the dinner, my apartment felt different, brighter somehow, as if the truth I was about to share had already begun to clear the air. My family arrived in their usual fashion, Mom with a store-bought pie and a nervous smile, Emily in a crisp blazer, Dad trailing behind, hands shoved deep in his pockets. We made small talk over salad and pasta, the tension simmering just beneath the surface. I could see the questions in their eyes, the impatience in Emily's tapping foot. The way Mom kept glancing at me as if searching for a clue. When the plates were cleared and the coffee poured, I took a deep breath and stood. My hands didn't shake this time. I asked you all here tonight because I have something important to tell you, I began, my voice steady. A few months ago, I won the lottery. $20 million. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. For a moment, no one spoke. Emily's mouth fell open, her eyes wide with disbelief. Mom's hand flew to her chest, her lips forming a silent, "Oh my God." Dad just stared at me, his expression unreadable. I let the silence stretch, watching as the reality of what I'd said began to sink in. I didn't tell anyone because I wanted to see who I could really count on. I continued, my gaze moving from one face to the next. I needed help, and I wanted to know if you'd be there for me. Not because you thought I had something to offer, but because you cared. My voice wavered, but I pressed on. What I found out hurt me more than I can say. I've realized I've spent my whole life trying to earn your love, your approval, your support. But when I needed you, you weren't there. The reactions came in waves. Emily was the first to speak, her voice sharp and defensive. You set us up. You lied to us. Mom's eyes filled with tears, her face crumpling as she whispered, I didn't know, Rachel. Thought you were just going through a rough patch. Dad looked away, his jaw clenched, silent as ever. I'm not telling you this to punish you, I said, my voice softening. I just needed you to know how it felt. I needed to stop pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I looked at each of them, feeling lighter with every word. From now on, things are going to be different. I'm done chasing after your approval. I'm done giving more than I get. I'm going to use this money to build the life I want on my own terms. The room was thick with regret and unspoken apologies. Emily stared at her hands. Mom wiped her eyes, and Dad finally met my gaze. A flicker of something. Maybe pride, maybe sorrow, passing between us. I knew things wouldn't change overnight. Maybe they never would. But for the first time, I felt free. As the night wore on, the conversation shifted. There were questions, awkward laughter, even a few tentative attempts at reconciliation. But I held my ground clear about my boundaries and my intentions. I was no longer the family's fixer, the one who bent until she broke. I was my own person, and I was finally ready to live that truth. No matter what anyone else thought, looking back. I realized the lottery win wasn't the real turning point in my life. It was the moment I stopped waiting for my family to give me the love and support I'd always craved. Winning millions forced me to see the truth, that love isn't proven by grand gestures or empty words, but by the quiet, everyday ways we show up for each other. I spent years believing I had to earn my place in my own family, that if I just tried harder, gave more, or stayed quiet, I'd finally be enough. But the hardest and most liberating lesson was understanding that my worth was never theirs to decide. I learned that trust is fragile, and sometimes the people we expect the most from are the ones who let us down. It hurt to see my family's true colors, to realize that their support had limits I never wanted to believe existed. But it also gave me the freedom to set boundaries, to protect my heart, and to choose relationships that nourish me instead of draining me. I discovered that it's okay to test the strength of our connections, not out of spite, but out of a deep need to know who will stand by us when the world feels heavy. If you're listening to my story and see yourself in these words, I want you to know you're not alone. It's brave to ask for help, and even braver to face the truth when it's not what you hoped for. Don't be afraid to value yourself, to demand reciprocity, and to walk away from relationships that only take. Sometimes the family we're born into isn't the one that lifts us up, and that's okay. You deserve to be surrounded by people who see your worth, even when you have nothing to offer but your honest, imperfect self. In the end, I didn't just win the lottery. I won my freedom, and that, I've learned, is the greatest prize of all.